Hello, welcome to Thor Talk, the show all about Marvel's resident god of thunder. On this episode of Thor Talk, I'm going to address Thor's portrayal in Avengers Endgame. Let's begin.
I am Thor the Thunderer, son of Odin, prince of Asgard, and this world is under my protection.
After Avengers Infinity War, I was ready for another solid Thor appearance in the Russos' follow-up, Avengers Endgame. I was disappointed. This movie constantly belittled Thor and didn't really seem to care about the character. They failed Thor by making him comedically fat, by ruining his complete film arc, and by robbing him of any sort of triumph. After failing to kill Thanos when he had the chance, Thor became an overweight alcoholic as a response to the trauma. It doesn't work. They kind of turned Thor into a bit of a loser. This plotline was not done in service of the character, but more in service of adding more comedy. The writers and directors have claimed that this was not to be comedic, but was actually to give a very relatable human response to trauma. Endgame writer Christopher Marcus said, "It wasn't so much, what a silly fat man. It was, he kind of looks like me when I take my shirt off." Thor became human for the first time. This is definitely not the reaction that Fat Thor got. Now, comedy is not necessarily bad, but Endgame saw the audience laughing at Thor when he was at his lowest. In my second viewing of the film, when Thor is explaining the ether to the Avengers, the audience started laughing when he started to break down in tears over the realization that his mother was dead. This should be tragic, but the audience didn't think that this moment humanized Thor at all. They thought it was funny. In Iron Man 3, when Tony Stark has a panic attack, it's done with dignity and not comedy. The writers clearly want the audience to care about Tony Stark and the journey he's going through. When Thor has a panic attack,
Come here.
No, I think I'm having a panic attack.
Come here.
Right here.
just to hammer home the idea that this is just a funny situation, his friends constantly berate him with fat jokes, making fun of him, despite the fact that he is clearly suffering and traumatized. And the audience doesn't seem to pity Thor, but instead laughs at him and how pathetic he's become. Despite some earlier claims, the writers and directors contradict themselves on the matter of Hamburg Thor. The writers insisted Fat Thor was not to be made fun of for humor, but Anthony Russo seemed to disagree.
And it's like, where do you go with a character who's that
right?
low, you know, who's carrying that much pain? And sometimes the road forward from that moment is through humor.
They knew exactly what they were doing. Writer Christopher Marcus also said, "We didn't want to treat the weight gain like the issue that he needed to get over. Like, Thor got fat and now he needs to go on a diet. That could work if you didn't have his own mother basically telling Thor that he needs to go on a diet.
Eat a salad."
Not to mention that Thor's weight gain has caused him to be severely out of shape, making him much weaker. So yes, the weight gain is an issue that he needs to overcome, because otherwise he will lose fights, and usually if Thor loses a fight, many people will die. I admit, I probably wouldn't be on board with a Fat Thor storyline in any scenario, but this one is so flawed as it mainly serves to make fun of the character and his pain. It has been argued that Thor's suffering leads to worthwhile character development in Avengers Endgame. This is true as he develops throughout the film, but it actually causes him to regress when compared to his complete film arc. When Thor goes to Asgard, he gets a heartfelt reunion with his mother, and she essentially tells him, "Don't be who you're supposed to be the best version of who you are." This lesson does help him move on from his current state, but while he's in a better state at the end of the film than he was throughout, he kind of forgot everything he's learned throughout every other movie. Thor decides that he should give up the throne and go wandering in space so that he can find himself and be the best version of himself and not what people expect of him. Now, I know why Marvel wanted Thor to do this. It's the same reason why Thor always gives up or loses the throne in the comics, because being the king of Asgard interferes with telling the stories that writers want to tell. Thor going off into space with no responsibilities puts him in a great position for future movies, but this choice actually hurts Thor's overall story. While this could have been acceptable since Thor's not exactly in a great state after Infinity War, and he may need to step back after all he's been through, the writers revealed in an interview that they actually believe this to be the perfect end to Thor's 7-film arc. Think about the journey everyone's on, and what is Thor defined by in his first movie, right? It's ambition, an obligation to Asgard and the crown, right? So what's the journey over 5 to 7 movies, right? It's releasing that burden. It's giving that up and being the person he is supposed to be, not the one who he's meant to be. No. Thor's journey has not been to shirk his responsibility as king because the expectations are too high. His journey has been to rise to these expectations and prove that he is worthy of the throne. Thor's journey is not to learn how to escape responsibility, but to cast aside all selfish ambition and embrace it. Though I genuinely do believe that Christopher Marcus and Steve McFeely believe that Thor should abdicate the throne, especially since they wrote Thor: The Dark World, in which Thor does just that. I think they were under the impression that Thor leaving the throne in Thor: The Dark World would be permanent when they wrote it, but Taika Waititi instead worked around this ending to allow Thor to complete his arc from the first movie and become king anyway. And Thor spends most of the movie being humiliated and being made fun of. Once again, this does nothing for his complete character arc, but this also does not automatically ruin the movie for Thor. The humiliation and fat jokes could be forgivable if Thor actually got the chance to do something worthwhile in this movie. It seems he's just been pushed to the side. In Thor Ragnarok, Thor, and Infinity War, he's often beat down and humiliated, but Thor still finds at least one moment of triumph, of power, that separates a god from a loser. The humiliation even makes the audience care all the more when Thor finally triumphs. You cannot have the Wakanda entrance with that same power if you don't have Thor seeing his brother murdered in front of him, if you don't have him being forced to take the full punishment of a star. But without that Wakanda entrance, that moment of triumph and power, then his punishment and suffering is just pointless humiliation, like it is in Avengers Endgame. Yes, in Endgame, Thor does regain Mjolnir, but he does nothing worthwhile with the hammer. It's Captain America that gets to use it, and use it well. It seems as if Thor only has Mjolnir so that it will be close enough to Captain America when it's his turn to use it. Thor is put to the side in favor of other characters and really accomplishes nothing. He's humiliated but never does anything great to balance that out. I get that they needed to make Thor weaker since he's a one-god army carrying a weapon that can kill Thanos, but they have to give him something. He doesn't take out Thanos' ship, he doesn't put up a good fight against Thanos, he doesn't even snap to fix the mistake that's been haunting him by restoring half the universe. Thor literally begs to be able to do something good, to redeem himself. But Stark and the writers tell him that he's not good enough. This was not a great movie for Thor, but I have to hope that the future will be better. It seems like Hemsworth is going to return for at least 2 more movies. Some rumors even say 5 movies. And with the bar set so low after Endgame, I have to believe that something good will come out of at least one of those movies. Well, that's all for this episode of Thor Talk. If you want to keep up with and support Thor Talk, simply subscribe. Once again, I'd like to formally state that all art and video is owned by its respective companies, and I own none of it. With that said, see you next time on Thor Talk, where...
You behold